Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today I'm sharing with you an audio recording of an interview I did with Claudia Coenen, and we talk all about creative tools for grief. We share how these tools could be helpful during a time of pandemic, like the COVID pandemic we've been through over the last couple of years. And these are tools anyone can use throughout life. So I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Claudia. Be sure and subscribe to this channel down below. Also, subscribe and leave a rating and review for End of Life University podcast wherever you happen to listen. And if you're willing to help support this channel and the podcast, go to eoluniversity.com/support and find out how you could make a small monthly or annual contribution to keep all this good information on the air. So let's move on with my interview with Claudia Coenen. Hello, everyone, and welcome to End of Life University podcast, where we share real talk about life and death. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt, and this is episode number 244. I'm really glad you've joined me again today, as we're still here in the middle of the global pandemic that has really turned life upside down for all of us and changed everything. And we're going through this time together. And I'm hopeful that my podcasts will be for you a source of inspiration, maybe an anchor to hold on to a little bit as we go through these times together. And it's my intention to share with you information that I hope will be helpful. So today, in just a few moments, I have an interview for you that I did with Claudia Coenen, who is a grief counselor who uses creativity to help people with their trauma and grief. So we're going to be talking about creative tools for grief during the COVID-19 pandemic. Claudia shares ideas for simple things that you can do even at home as you are dealing with grief over all the changes that have taken place in our lives. Many of us perhaps have not experienced the death of a loved one due to this virus, but we have experienced the little death of all of the things we have known to be normal in our day-to-day lives. And that creates a lot of stress and trauma for us as we're figuring out how to negotiate with the changes that have happened. So Claudia's suggestions are things that I think you'll find helpful in getting through these days. Before we start, I just have one quick announcement that my new book, 7 Lessons for Living from the Dying, is going to be officially released on May 12th. Although it will be released only as an ebook initially because there's a real slowdown in publishing of print books right now. So it's available for pre-order on Amazon, and I will share a link with that in the show notes for this episode. And just to remind you, this is a new, revised, and expanded version of my older book, What Really Matters, which I wrote 10 years ago. So I've updated the whole book. I've added a lot to it, and it has a new title and a new cover, and it's being published by Watkins UK. So May 12th is the official date, but you can pre-order it now if you'd like to reserve a copy of it. And it will be available in print eventually as soon as the printers and distributors are able to get up and running. So check that out. Again, you can go to eolupodcast.com and you'll find not only the link for where to pre-order the book, but also all of the show notes for this episode and the archives of every episode I've done in the past. So eolupodcast.com is a good place to go, especially if you're new to the podcast. You can go through there, scroll down through the episodes, see what you're interested in listening to. You can also subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. So that gives you a choice of platforms to listen in the future. And then one last thing before we get on, I have a journaling prompt for you to work on this week. I've been sharing a journaling prompt in hopes that if some of us are at home and have a little bit more time than usual on our hands, it's a great time to start a journaling practice. So I've been giving some prompts every week. And this week, I would like to talk a little bit about forgiveness and the gifts of forgiveness. One thing that we know medically right now is that practicing forgiveness is actually good for your immune system. And what do we need more in our own individual bodies than a healthy immune system to help us fight off the coronavirus or any other viruses or sicknesses that we might be exposed to? So, working on forgiveness is going to benefit each one of us physically, but I believe that right now is a time when we need to strengthen our collective immune system as a human species. And in a way, all of the divisiveness and hatred and anger that has been spread throughout our society has harmed our collective immune system. And one of the ways we can begin to heal that is by practicing forgiveness in our own lives. The other practice that's really helpful for the immune system is gratitude, and we've already been working on that every week by finishing the sentence, right now I'm okay because, and then listing the things in our lives that are actually going well, the things that we're actually grateful for right now in life. So we're going to add to that journaling practice of gratitude by also working on forgiveness. And I feel each one of us needs to begin by forgiving ourselves. So rather than trying to look at the challenging work of forgiving other people from our past, just begin by looking within and writing about some things that you might need to forgive about yourself. And I have a poem to read to you that is by Sri Chinmoy, who is an Indian spiritual leader and meditation teacher. So he writes, "If I cannot forgive myself for all the blunders that I have made over the years, then how can I proceed? How can I ever dream perfection dreams? Move I must forward. Fly I must upward. Dive I must inward to be once more what I truly am and shall forever remain." And so in this poem, he's telling us that forgiveness of ourselves is necessary for us to become who we truly are, to be our truest, deepest selves, and in order to dream our perfection dreams. And so I think of it as, in order to find creativity to move forward in life, especially right now, forgiveness of ourselves is one of the most important steps we can take. So dive, as he said, dive inward in order to discover who you truly are. And forgive yourself for all the blunders that you've made over the years. So let's let that be our journaling practice for this week. What blunders do you still hate yourself for? Where do you hold on to self-loathing over a choice you made or a step you took that you regret? And work on how can you let go of that and forgive yourself? How can you begin to see everything that happened in the past as an important part of what made you who you are today, so that you can stop being angry with yourself, stop blaming yourself, and just let go of all of that self-resentment. So that's your task for this week to work on in your journal. This is a big one and a heavy one. Meanwhile, keep writing down those things that you're grateful for every day as well. And hopefully we're going to come out of this experience stronger, with greater resilience, and with immunity toward all of those attacks that come toward us. So let's get strong together. Let's make our collective community stronger. Let's make our planet stronger by practicing forgiveness and gratitude. So now we'll move on with my interview with Claudia Coenen. And remember to stay tuned afterwards. I'll come back with just a few takeaways and to say goodbye. So here we go. Today, I'm happy to welcome my guest, Claudia Coenen. Claudia is a certified grief counselor and is also certified in thanatology through the Association of Death Education and Counseling. She is also a musician, dancer, writer, mother, chef, traveler, and all-around creative person who helps bereaved clients find resilience in the midst of their losses through compassionate presence, creative process, somatic and expressive therapy techniques. Claudia is also the author of 2 books, Shattered by Grief, Picking Up the Pieces to Become Whole Again, and The Creative Toolkit for Working with Grief and Bereavement, a Practitioner's Guide. You can learn more about Claudia's work at her website, which is thekarunaproject.com. Karuna is spelled Karuna, thekarunaproject.com. So Claudia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Karen. It's nice to be here.
And before we get started, I just wanted to check in, as I've been doing in a lot of these interviews lately, to see how things are going for you and your community during this COVID-19 crisis.
Things are anxious in the external world for sure, and we're in a good place, my husband and I, and we have enough food and we have a comfortable home, so we're actually okay. But we're worried about our family members. We have some family members down in New York City, and although they seem to be very safe, it's still very problematic down there. And one of the hardships for me personally is that my children live very far away, and I wish I was closer to them.
I resonate with that. I think, first of all, even though I do have friends in New York City, and every single day I wake up and I look at what's happening in New York, and just connecting so much with the pain that people have gone through there. And like you, my children are far away, and I'd give anything if I could be together with them, but I'll have to be patient for that to happen.
Right.
Well, as we get started here, talking a lot about creativity and grief, which is what you bring so beautifully into your practice, I would like to hear your story and how you first got interested in working with grief.
I became interested in working with grief when I was suddenly forced to grieve myself. I suffered a sudden loss in 2005. My husband died very suddenly, and because I have had a lifetime in the arts, in music and dance, and I've always kept a journal, I've always processed my feelings through writing and through other creative techniques, I immediately went to creative process to help myself through grief. And it occurred to me that that might be a pathway into helping other people, because my own personal grief awakened me to the grief of others that I hadn't really experienced before, I hadn't really felt. I mean, I had some other losses, of course, but nothing felt as devastating as this. And I really felt completely shattered by this loss. And I thought, in the process of putting myself back together, that there might be a way to help other people.
I love what you said, that your grief awakened you to the suffering of other people, because I think that's so true. It's very hard for anyone to understand the grief over the death of a loved one until they have experienced grief themselves.
Yes, I think it's true. And while we wouldn't wish it on anybody else, we all are going to grieve at various times in our lives, and sometimes multiple times. And I just felt really filled with compassion for other people, as I was trying to, find compassion for myself.
And I love that your creativity came right to the forefront for you, because that's what had probably sustained you through other times of life as a creative person, and that you were able to bring that into your own grief process is perfect. And also recognize that that's something other people could benefit from too.
Right. I mean, it's always been a debate in my life. I used to carry on a correspondence with a great aunt who was 50 years older than me. And we would have these debates about whether everybody was creative or not, because I think that everybody is creative. And she would argue with me because I think she was thinking that not everybody can be a great artist. And that really wasn't my point. My point was, we all have the opportunity to view things in a more creative way. We don't have to see things as black and white. We can see things in multiple colors and in nuance. And when we have a difficult situation and we make a choice to look at it in a different frame, or through a different lens, or to feel into it, or to think about what its color might be, or where it's landing in our body, that's a creative way of approaching it.
I agree with you, with your perspective. I think every one of us has the possibility of tapping into creativity. I think oftentimes in our society, we don't really help people discover their creativity. At least that's how it looks to me, that oftentimes people are really given that message, oh, you're probably not creative, and many people give up and don't even explore that aspect of themselves.
I think it's because we're very goal oriented. We're looking for a product. So I was always told, even though I was a very creative child and a creative human being, if I tried to draw, I was always told that I couldn't draw. And it certainly looked that way because I couldn't make, fine art the way some of my friends could, or my friends' parents could, who were actual quote artists. So I gave it up because I couldn't produce a beautiful picture. But when I realized that it's when you're using creativity for grief or for difficult life transitions, it isn't about the product. It's about the process. It's about exploring your experience through nonverbal ways, using color, shape, torn pieces of paper, or movement or music. So it isn't about, oh, now I have a beautiful picture that I can hang on the wall. It's about how I'm exploring my inner experience in these other ways.
And that makes sense to me, that I think much of the grief experience is nonverbal for us, and it's very hard for us to simply express it in any other way. And that's maybe why creativity helps us. It allows us other avenues for just putting our grief on paper in a certain way, or making it visible in the world without just having to use words to do that.
Absolutely. And I think that when we allow ourselves to engage in other modalities, in other ways of approaching our grief and experiencing it, we actually enrich the experience. We deepen into our experience if we take that energy of feeling that's inside of us that we don't know what to do with, and we spread it out on a page in color without worrying about what it looks like. And then afterwards, we can look at that mishmash of scratches and colored lines and all these different things, and we can have a dialogue with that feeling. And it also tends to get it out of our body, so we've released it onto the page.
That's another good point, about having a way to express it differently than just using a verbal approach does probably help us make it visible to us, so that we can see it and explore it and contemplate it a little better.
Yeah, and even if it's just something simple like a slash across the page because you're feeling angry, that gesture and that line across the page is a creative act. And after you've done that, you might take a deep breath, and then maybe then you could add words to it, what it is that you're feeling. So words have their place, and they're very useful. I mean, I happen to be a very verbal person. And in fact, when I was in my graduate program, one of my mentors, who was a music therapist, said to me that words were a secondary way of communicating. And at first I objected to that idea because I'm such a big talker. But when I thought about it, I realized that she was correct, because if you think about how we communicate, we are communicating with one another when we're face to face in very nonverbal ways. We communicate with our expression on our face, with the gestures, with our body language. We can also sense energy and emotion from each other. So there's a lot of nonverbal ways that we're already communicating with one another, even when we're not aware of it.
And what that just made me think of is the fact that we often hear stories of people who try to comfort someone who's grieving by saying something, and many times end up saying something that's not helpful to the other person, because words alone can't necessarily convey what it is that we'd like to express, or don't necessarily touch us in the way that we want to be held or recognized.
Yeah, that's so true. And sometimes, I mean, usually those are meant with a lot of longing for comfort. A person will say something to a grieving person because they want to try to help, and they want to say something that they think might be comforting, but it may not be received that way. And like, for instance, for me, to be told he's in a better place is a horrible thing. It's a terrible thought. I really don't like it. I would get very angry. I would not snap at the person who would say that, but I really didn't appreciate that thought. But there are some people for whom that really is a useful comment. So you never really know. It's best to just say, I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm here for you, and not try to pull out a cliche.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with you. And I'm curious to know, what sort of creative techniques do you utilize? Like, if someone comes to you grieving and asking for your help, Tell us some
So
of the things that you use.
the first thing that I do, I mean, I will let my clients know that I do have a creative approach, but I don't want to scare them off because some people are like, oh, I can't do that, you know. So we usually start with them telling me their story, and I ask them to tell me, you know, what it is that they want to tell me, what they want me to know. So we start with story, and we certainly do a lot of talking in my office. Um, but if the story starts to repeat itself, I might invite them to take a different view of it, to try to look at their story from a different side. And that might be the beginning of trying to provide some creative ideas. Another thing that I'll do is if a person is telling me a story and they come up with a very strong metaphor that seems to have a visual attached to it, I might invite them to take a piece of paper and some colored pencils or some crayons that I have here in my office, and just draw out that metaphor and then see where that leads them. So that's often a way just to get into the creative process.
I'm just curious, when you have people draw, do you give them like crayons or colored pencils or like?
I have colored pencils. I really like oil pastels, so I have a big box of oil pastels. Those are fun because they're very bright colors, and you can also smudge them and smear them, and that becomes a tactile experience. I also sometimes do touch drawing with my clients. Touch drawing is a process that was developed by my friend Deborah Koff Chapin, and it is basically making a monoprint where you ink a sheet of plexiglass or melamine with a very fine layer of ink, and then you lay a piece of tissue paper down on top, and you draw on the back of it, so you end up with this monoprint. And this is something that you can do with your eyes closed, and you don't even need to look at the picture. You can just erase the picture, which is a metaphor in and of itself. You just erase what just happened, and then you do another one. And then after you've done a series, when you feel like you want to stop, then you can look at them. And I don't do this very often because it does require some setup, and the client needs to really want to do it. And oftentimes I'll do it with them, so we're both doing it at the same time. But that's a really wonderful experience.
Oh, how interesting. It sounds as though your office is a bit of an art studio in a sense.
Well, I have an art corner, let's put it that way.
Because I was thinking about, say, for those of us at home who, I mean, I think a lot of us, unless we have children, we may not even have drawing supplies or art supplies available at home. Can people get the same benefit if all they have is an ink pen and a piece of paper?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, you can also use, if you have magazines around, or, you know, anything that, you know, any other kind of visual, you can use those kind of things to find material for collage, because collage is a really wonderful thing to do when you're grieving. If you just open up magazines and just take out the pictures that really speak to you, or some words, and then you can cut them out with scissors, but there's also something very satisfying about ripping them out and having torn edges, and then putting them together on a page and gluing them down. It becomes a metaphor for putting yourself back together.
Oh, I love that idea. And I think that takes away some of the fears of, but I can't draw. And also those of us who may have felt judged by art teachers from years of childhood, who are a little afraid of trying to draw something. Collage lets us use different skills in a way, picking out the pictures we like and the words we like and just combining them.
The other thing that's so great about using creative process for grief and difficult times in your life is that once you're finished with whatever it is that you've created, you don't even have to keep it. You know, you can crumple it up and throw it away if you feel like it. It's not, because again, it's not about the product, it's about that experience. Now, one thing you might want to do before you throw it away is enter into a dialogue with what you've created. Look at it, see if it has a message for you. Maybe write it down. You can journal on something that you have done, and you know, then if you feel like it, you can throw it away. Or keep it if you really like it. You might end up with something that you really like. Here in my office, I actually have some things that I've done, watercolors and touch drawings, and I like them enough to hang them up.
I like that idea of being able to let go of it, the symbolism of that. I mean, being able to throw it away, as if being able to let your story transform and grow and change, and letting go of the old story, and maybe down the road creating something that represents a newer story.
Yeah, and if you've been dealing with a really difficult emotion, say you've been just burned up with anger, and it's really you have a reason to be angry, but it's kind of holding you back. So if you process your anger in a creative way and then you release it by literally getting rid of it, that's not to say you're not going to be angry again, but it does help in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the symbolism of that. And so I know you also, do you utilize things like dance and music in your grief work?
I utilize dance in terms of using certain somatic techniques, and that might be, I pay a lot of attention to body language. Having been a dancer and a choreographer, it's kind of a natural thing for me to do. So if a client is folded in on themselves with their arms wrapped around, or maybe they look like they might be tense, I notice that, and I might very gently mirror that and reflect back to them and ask what would happen if they were to open up their chest and just breathe into their chest, and just feel the difference between being contained and sort of hugging themselves, and what does it feel like to open back up again. And I had a client once who was in our session. She kept rubbing her shoulder as if it was in a lot of pain, and so I finally asked her, what's going on with your shoulder? And she said that it hurt a lot, but that she had met a woman who said she was a psychic, and the woman said that her daughter was sitting on her shoulder. And she found that very disturbing, the idea that her dead daughter was on her shoulder, and her shoulder began to hurt. So I validated that, and then I asked her what would happen if she were to gently rub her shoulder as if she was stroking her daughter. And maybe she could do that with a lotion that she enjoyed, perhaps a lavender lotion or something that was soothing to her while she did that. And she thought about that, and then she did it a little bit in the office, and she said it made her feel her shoulder. It made her feel her shoulder was a little bit better. And then she told me later that when she went home, she took a lavender bath, and she imagined that she was stroking her daughter, and she felt much, much better, and her shoulder stopped hurting.
Wow, that's a great story of just that actually our bodies communicate with us symbolically in so many ways. So our physical symptoms oftentimes represent emotional and spiritual pain that we need to deal with. So I love this idea of using a physical technique with the body, but how it can help us deal with our emotional issues.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes if a client feels very, very activated and very agitated, we might get up and sort of swing our arms around. And I will always do this with them so they feel comfortable. We might reach up to the sky and just swing down. And there's a lot of different, very simple movements that you can do that will help release held emotion in your body and release the energy.
So I could see that as something even people listening could do at home if they're starting to feel a lot of tension and even despair around the news they're hearing and things that are happening right now, just every day as a way to loosen up a little bit.
Yeah, and taking a walk can be really helpful. And another technique for walking is to walk really slowly. When we slow down our walk and we just sense our feet on the ground and we feel the breath moving through our bodies, and then we begin to focus around very lightly and notice what's happening. We might hear a rustle in the leaves, and maybe there's a little squirrel there, or, we see a bird fly by. And to just slow down and make it almost like a meditation can be very, very grounding for people.
And I know that you and I had talked previously about the fact that a lot of people are dealing with fear right now. It's really fear of the unknown, kind of this external threat to us from the COVID-19, and if dealing with fear and not sure how to help with that. And you had talked to me about a few things that you offer your clients as well for that.
So I have a worksheet that I use, and it is in my new book. And I call it Fear and Action. And it's a very simple diagram. It is a square on top of a circle, and the circle is sort of bisected on one corner by the square. And so the square is divided into two parts diagonally. And the first one says, what I fear. And the second one says, what I wish for. And then the circle says, what can I do? So the first way to cope with fear is to identify, what is it that I'm afraid of? What is it that's really making me feel anxious in this time? And you just write that down in that triangle. And then you put in what you wish for, which may be very much related to what you're afraid of. So you can put that out, and you can put the wish. I recommend putting the wish out, even if it's an unattainable wish. So like, I wish we could all get out of quarantine. I wish that there was no coronavirus. We can't do that, but we can certainly wish for it. And then filling in the circle, which is a much larger visual. What can I do? So I have this fear and anxiety, and I know that I can't make the virus go away. So what can I do to be a little more centered, a little more grounded, a little less anxious while I'm at home? What are things that I can do with myself and with the people that are in the home with me so that I can get through this time? So that becomes a way of working through the fear.
I really like that. I actually naming the fear, because I think sometimes it's a vague fear that we feel anxiety, we feel fear, but we haven't really thought about what specifically is it that is making me fearful. And I think that's a great idea to write it down and then counter that with our wishes, and then get really practical about what's possible in this moment right here and now.
And I think we don't want to dismiss these feelings. We don't want to say, oh, I shouldn't be afraid. If you are afraid, you're afraid. If you're anxious, you're anxious. But if you want to sort of name it, give it a name, start talking about it with yourself. Do I really need to be this afraid of that? Is that realistic? So if you become sort of put it through a reality test. And that's why by putting the wish on top of that, you can sort of see those two things. Well, there's this wish that's sort of unattainable, but there's also this fear, and that's not really very helpful. So now what actions can I take?
Yeah, and that's one of the best ways to deal with fear, is knowing that there's something we can do. There is something physical and tangible in this moment that we can do, and maybe it's just a matter of washing our hands better, or sanitizing the countertop or something like that. Maybe those small actions can actually help us feel better and feel safer.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes just narrowing your focus, like instead of worrying, I became very upset on Friday, thinking I'm not going to be able to see my grandchild until he's 3 years old, and that's a horrible thought. He's changing so much right now. He's 2.5, and I started to get very upset about it. And that's like, well, you know what? I'm going to write to my daughter and say, let's have a video chat so that I get to see him. There are things that are not in my control, but there are some things that are. So if I narrow my focus, okay, this weekend I can see him. And that I'm not going to worry about when the next time will be that I can see him physically. We'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yes, I love that. And it ends up, sometimes it is the smallest action that could make all the difference in how we're viewing things and how much control we feel we have.
Yes.
And then another thing that you talked to me about, this was using collage again, but you mentioned to me the shield collage, which I really like this idea because it's something that we could do at home with children as well.
Yes, and this could be really fun. I call it the shield of protection. And in the Creative Toolkit, there actually is a page that has, a traditional shield shape. But you can do this on anything. You can do it on a piece of paper. In my office, I often use cardboard rounds, which are cake rounds. So any surface that you want. And it might be nice to create a shape that you're going to collage within. If you're going to use a big piece of paper, make a circle on it. And then inside of that circle, you're going to create your own shield of protection that's going to protect you from fear and anxiety and from whatever it is that you feel you need protection for. So again, you would gather images and words and other things that you might want to put on your collage, and you can start to lay it out, and you can move it around a little bit until it's the way that you like it. And having words of power in there might be really helpful, like strong or happy or grateful, whatever words you feel are going to provide you with protection in this time and remind you that you can get through this. And then you glue it all down, and then you have your shield of protection.
I love the symbolism of that, and just remembering that we do have a shield of protection around us. I mean, I feel like that's empowering. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you've had experience for people who maybe don't have magazines at home or catalogs or anything they can get pictures from. Have you had people print them online, like print out pictures or images, and then you can tear those out and glue those on?
Oh, of course you can. And another thing you can do if you're grieving, or even if you're not able to see people that you wish you could see, you can print out pictures of them and put them on your collage.
That's a great idea. Great idea. And having all the people that you love be part of your shield of protection in a way, all these people out there that are thinking about you and caring about you in this moment.
Yeah, and this is a great thing to do with children, to get children to identify the people that they love and that care about them and that are there for them. And then they could you could help them print out the pictures of those people, and then they could collage them within their shield and then put some empowering words, and, then they have their own shield.
Mm. I really like that idea a lot as an activity that the whole family could do at home. Everyone could make their own shields and talk about what makes you feel safe and what people out there in the world are part of your shield of protection. I think that's great. Um, and then let's see, were there any other creative techniques that you wanted to recommend?
Um, well, we didn't talk about the Karuna cards because there's a lot of ideas in this deck of cards that I've created. Um, they're prompts for journaling, for other kinds of creative activities, and also for simple ways to regulate your emotion. And this kind of tool is a really useful one for conversation, for processing, for getting through the day. And some of them, like I said, some of them are journal prompts. Like this one says, complete the following sentences in your journal. I am, I hope, I wish, I will always remember, I will. So that becomes an exploration of a variety of things. And another one, which is just a very simple question, which could then lead into a conversation with the people that you're with. How are you courageous?
Hmm. Oh, I like that. So these cards, this is a deck. How many cards are in the deck?
The deck has 52 cards because that is what a traditional card deck has. Originally, they were 5 slips of paper that I developed when I was working in a hospice. And I was often recommending to my clients some sort of a creative thing to do, and especially the journaling. And people would say, I always thought of journaling, but I really don't know how to start. So I just developed these little slips of paper and would offer them, pick one, and then why don't you write in your journal? And then when I come back next time, you can share what you wrote if you'd like. They then became about 20 cards, and then they moved up to being 40. And then when I proposed them to a publisher, we decided to make them 52 cards.
Mm. And they're also really beautiful. I've just seen them online, but they're really beautiful in appearance, and they're larger than just the standard playing cards.
Yes, they are. They're a nice size, and they're nice. They feel nice in your hand. They have this beautiful. They have these circles on the back that are filled with color, and they're just lovely. My publisher, the designer from the publisher, made the look of them, and I'm very pleased with them.
So these cards are something, I mean, you could own it, have them at home, and you could use them in lots of different situations when you wanted to have conversations together as a family, or personally if you wanted to be inspired to journal. But have you found, are they helpful for other counselors and therapists to use in their practice?
Yes, a lot of therapists are using them, and they're used in support groups for a variety of different types of support. Sometimes they're used in mental health support groups. I mean, in that case, usually the person who's offering them, whether it's a therapist or the person who's leading the group, might pre-select a card, and then that would become like the one, "How are you courageous?" would be the topic of the group. Trauma therapists have been using them. They've been used by a lot of different types of people. You might find that maybe 1 or 2 of the cards are not appropriate for the situation that you're dealing with, so you could pull those out. And the other thing, the beauty of it is that the invitation is simply to shuffle them and to choose one. And if you don't like it or it doesn't speak to you, then shuffle again and choose a different one.
Hmm. And I like that idea, because oftentimes I've been recommending journaling to people for a long time, but I get that same response very often, that people just say, but I don't know what to write about. And so having a prompt like this is really helpful for most of us when we sit down with our pen and paper, try to figure out what we should put down.
Right.
And so, one of the other things I wanted to talk with you are about, as a grief therapist, about the various models out there for grief and how you use them, and some of your favorite approaches to grief.
Well, I'm particularly fond of the shattering of the assumptive world as it was elucidated by Colin Murray Parks and Bowlby. Um, I felt completely shattered when my husband died, and that made a lot of sense to me, that model of how we have this assumption of how we're going to live and how our lives are going to be. And then when death crashes in, everything is just completely changed. And it's very hard to grapple with that. And what does that mean? How do we put ourselves back together? It's a model that really speaks to me. The meaning-making model of Dr. Niemeyer and other people was one, when I first heard about it, I was very angry because I misinterpreted it. The idea that there was meaning in his death was something I couldn't wrap my mind around. And it wasn't until I realized that I could make meaning in my own life, having been through this experience, then I understood what they're talking about by finding a new purpose in your life. I'm also really fond of the dual process because I really think that speaks to sort of the everyday experience, how we go back and forth between feeling our feelings and sort of what we've lost, and focusing on the sadness and the sorrow and what we miss, and sort of the other side of that, of restoring into our regular lives, of, we have to get up and take a shower, we have to go to work, we have to do things. So that fluctuation between feeling and doing makes a lot of sense to me as well.
And as you talk, I'm thinking back to probably the most difficult grief that I had to deal with was after the suicide death of my father. And so I relate so well with all three of these models, but I could probably agree with you that meaning making didn't make sense to me in the beginning. I definitely felt shattered, and I couldn't even imagine how I could ever make meaning out of that shattering. But it was several years later when I think that suddenly became apparent to me, like, aha, I can find meaning through this. But it took a long time for me to get to that place.
Yeah, it's a really tough call, especially with a sudden death or a traumatic death. It's very hard to see. I mean, I was quite. I think that's why He's in a Better Place didn't work for me, because it just didn't make sense. How come he's not here with us, and how can I make meaning out of that when he died when he was 50? That makes no sense. But I think that, and I think that it also, the idea of transformation through grief, which is something that's very dear to my heart, I think that it is a possibility, but it's hard to wrap your mind around that with a suicide death, or with some, like the death of a child. You can't really talk about, oh, you can transform your life when your child dies. That's, a person's not really going to be able to accept that. So there's a lot of nuances in how we approach grief and how we approach each person who may be coming to us for help. We need to be really sensitive to that.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think we often hear there's no right or wrong way to grieve. We each tend to have our own path within that, and our own response to grief. But I think you're so right. It's really helpful if we have lots of tools available and we understand that not every tool is appropriate at any individual time, at any given time during a person's pathway in grief.
Correct. And that's why I wanted to write a toolkit, because that's what we need. We need to have a number of different approaches at our fingertips. We need to have our awareness open to sort of feel what might be right. We also need to be able to not say anything sometimes, and just to allow the client to explore their experience.
Yes, yes, I think you're exactly right. Silence could be one of our most powerful tools at times. Or even, I mean, the willingness to say, I don't have answers for you, but I can sit here with you. I can sit here in the midst of your pain and be with you and acknowledge it, and not leave you alone with it, and not reject you for what you're going through.
Exactly. I think that's also another model that I like. I like Alan Wolfeld's companioning model, the idea that my job is to simply walk beside you with your grief.
Yes, and then there's no assumption that I know more than you do, or I have answers for you that you're missing, but that you will find your own answers, and I'm going to support you while you're doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, so this is really great, and I just love the emphasis that the more tools we have, I think the more resilience we have, and the better off we are in terms of coping with all of the difficulties that arise during life.
Yes. And you talk about resilience. I mean, one thing I have in my office is a little basket that has quotes from a variety of different people, and, whether they might be a proverb or an adage or a quote from Winston Churchill or from Louisa May Alcott. And they're all about resilience. And I have them on little slips of paper. So sometimes I might offer the basket and say, pick one. And then the client will open it up. And it almost always really speaks to what they're going through at that moment.
Oh, I love that. What a great idea. Even I like that idea. I love to collect quotes, and I have all through all the files in my computer. I have lots of different pages where I've, saved quotes, but that's a great idea to print them all out and put them in a basket so that they'd be accessible in the moment.
Yes. And, quotes are another way to use your journal, because if there are quotes that are meaningful to you, or there are lyrics to a song that really makes you feel connected to the person who has died, you can write those down in your journal, or you can print them up and paste them in so you have them. You don't have to always just put your own words. A journal is not about, dear diary, this morning I had oatmeal for breakfast. It's a place to pour your thoughts and your feelings, and it becomes this container that then you can close and put on the shelf.
Yes, a safe container that will never judge you or never turn you away.
Yes, and it is supposed to be private, so you might want to put it in a place where nobody else is going to find it.
Yeah, yes, that's true. Well, one of the things that I've been contemplating lately is how all of us, as we go through this pandemic together, are experiencing grief. Not all of us have had a loved one die because of the coronavirus, but all of us, wherever we are, have experienced losses. Life has changed dramatically. And some of us probably even resonate with that idea of being shattered in a way. They've lost their jobs, lost their source of income, lost their social connections with other people. And I think it has been a shattering experience for many people. And I've been longing for a way for all of us to feel more connected within that shared grieving experience as a community, even as a world, as a planet together, to recognize that all of us, and this is to go back to what you were talking about, allow this grief to awaken us to the suffering of other people. And what occurred to me is that perhaps we need a creative ritual of some sort that we could all be adopting and then utilizing day to day to remind us of how our own suffering and our own grief connects us with other people.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think before we go into the possibility of a ritual, though, I think it's good to remind ourselves that now is the time to really reach out, more so than we might have before. One way to remind ourselves that we are connected to our loved ones is to call them up, to have a Zoom meeting. I had a Zoom cocktail party with my sister and her husband the other night. And if you don't want to do it on the computer, send letters. Why don't we start sending cards to each other? Hi, I miss you. It's nice to get something in the mail. And any little gesture that we can do to reach out to the people in our circle and the people that we care about, and maybe even some people that we haven't spoken to in a long time, that can help. But I also do agree that a ritual might be a useful thing.
Yeah, well, those are great suggestions for helping us to stay connected and feel more connected in the moment.
So I was thinking about the Lovingkindness Meditation, which is a very simple statement of four sentences, and they can change. There's usually a standard format, but I like to change them up. So I was thinking that this might be a way to help us ritualize and feel connected. So a Lovingkindness meditation is four sentences that always start with I. So you start with yourself, and then you move to we. And so you start to beam those same ideas out towards everyone. So the one that I came up with was this: may I be at peace. May I be healthy and strong. May I be open-hearted. May I remember we are all connected.
Oh, I love that. I'm writing these down.
I'm going to say them again, but I'm going to say them with we. May we be at peace. May we be healthy and strong. May we be open-hearted. May we remember we are all connected.
Oh, I love that as just a little blessing that we could say each day, first for ourselves. And then, I like what you're emphasizing there, that we have to look after ourselves first, and then we can expand from our own abundance and our own well-being and send that out to the world.
Now, if you want to, you can actually move with this. You can stand up and you can reach your hands up to the sky and then bring them down through your body as you exhale, and then bring your hands up to your heart and then say each statement. So you would reach up to the sky, take a deep breath in, breathe out as you reach down, breathe back up to your heart, and then say, may I be at peace. And then repeat the gesture again. So with every movement, you're saying one of the sentences, and then it becomes a whole body experience.
I really like that. I like that as something that we could even do that as we wake up in the morning and start the day, a way to get the day started on a positive note, and feeling connected already with other people, and feeling well within ourselves too.
Right.
So that's wonderful. So that actually really fulfills what I was hoping for, something simple that we could teach to other people and share with other people. And that just the thought that many of us are saying this loving kindness meditation every day, I think that gives me comfort in a way, to know that we're all working together to strengthen the connections that we have with one another.
Yes, I think we need that at this time.
Definitely, because it's really a rare time. I mean, I've always, in the past, I've thought, well, I may be grieving now, and I recognize that other people also grieve, but this is an unprecedented time when we can actually look out and see that everyone is experiencing this. Our entire planet is going through this together. It's phenomenal in a way, and it's nice to actually set aside a little bit of time each day to acknowledge that.
Yes. And I think focusing on how we're connected and to try to reduce our fear and anxiety and elevate our compassion and our um, our sense of love for each other, that can really help the whole planet if we do that, if everybody does that.
Yes, and I think that's a really good antidote to some of the fear and anxiety that we might be feeling as well.
I hope so.
Claudia, I wanted to ask you about your books, because I'm really excited to share them. And I think this is a time when a lot of people out there could really benefit from the writing that you've done. So the first one, I wanted to ask you about Shattered by Grief, Picking Up the Pieces to Become Whole Again. And if you'd tell us a little bit about it, and especially I know that you've used the word whole, WHOLE, as a mnemonic for some of the chapters. And would you tell us about
Yes.
that?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, I'm a very big journaler. I journal a lot, and in the first year after my husband died, I filled the pages of 12 journals. And I kept on doing that. I kept on processing my feelings through writing as I progressed through my grief process. And I thought that maybe there would be a book there at some point. I had always considered that I wrote in my journals, but I never thought of myself as a writer. So, but it seemed like there was a book there. But I also knew that I didn't want to just write a memoir. I wanted it to be more a broader appeal for other people. So I wanted to have it be a little more universal. So when I worked in a hospice for almost 4 years, I actually stopped writing because it was pretty intense work, and I learned so much. And I began also gathering stories from other people. So that began to inform the shape of the book. So it starts out with my own story, and then it moves into a little bit of an overview about how we grieve and some different techniques for it. And then I get to the whole process, which is what I call it. And the WHOLE are chapter headings, and W is who am I? Because there's often a sort of an identity crisis that we experience when we are first grieving. And what happened? So then that becomes the story, the story that we tell about our grief and about our loss. H is a little bit more practical help. How do I do this? O is opening to emotion. So it explores all the different feelings and then ways to process them. L is learning to live fully again. So now we're starting to think about, what's my life going to look like now? I've been shattered. I'm trying to put myself back together. What's that going to look like? And then E is exploring the past to experience the future. And that's where I start to talk about the continuing bonds and how we can bring aspects of our loved one through in our lives and consider the gifts that we have had from being in relationship with them. So it's not, this is not the only way to do grief. There is no one way to do grief, but it sort of takes apart various aspects of grief, what people usually feel. And then all of those chapters have some creative ideas in there, different exercises or techniques that you can use.
And I like how you've actually incorporated those models that we talked about, shattering, the assumptive world, meaning making, dual process, continuum bonds. You've actually incorporated all of the models in one way or another into this whole process.
Yes, exactly. So that book was published last year by Jessica Kingsley. And then the Creative Toolkit for Working with Grief and Bereavement is a practitioner's guide, and it is focused towards people who may be having grieving people come into their offices, like therapists, maybe doctors, nurse practitioners, anybody who might be encountering somebody in grief and trying to help them. And they haven't learned anything about thanatology. They don't know about death, dying, and bereavement, except perhaps the 5 stages of grief. So this first part of the book gives them an overview of grief theory and practice and an overview of 7 of my favorite models. Plus, it takes a look through the lenses of the whole process, those same lenses that I just mentioned, that same, WHOLE. And then there are 30 activity sheets in the book that you can then photocopy and use. And they're all fairly flexible. Some of them are somatic, and there are some drawings for some things that you can do with your body. And some of them are collage projects, some of them are diagrams. But there are ways that you can work with grieving clients. And the book is appropriate for therapists and practitioners. It also could be appropriate if you are starting as peer support group, or even if you're a massage therapist and you might have a client on your table who tells you that they're grieving and you're not really sure what to say. So it provides a lot of information.
I love this because I can say back in the days when I was grieving over my dad's suicide death and really needed help, literally in my entire community, there was not one therapist who had dealt with grief after a suicide death, and none also who had any real training in dealing with grief either. And I found it very unhelpful to go to them, that they honestly had trouble relating to what I was experiencing. And I ended up just going it alone. But as a doctor, I can also say doctors have zero training in recognizing grief, in helping their patients talk about grief and deal with grief. And as I look back now and think of how many patients in my office that I saw actually had grief as something they were experiencing in the moment when they came in for a physical complaint, but grief was part of it. They were grieving at that time, and how often it goes unrecognized in those day-to-day situations.
You're right. And unfortunately, medical training is often antithetical to the most important thing that we can offer a grieving person, which is simply to be there with them. Because doctors are trained, and it's a wonderful thing. You're trained to try to fix things. You're trained to try to cure them, to alleviate their pain and to make them feel better. And we might be able to alleviate somebody's pain in grief for a little bit of a time, but we can't fix it. You can't fix the fact that somebody has died. You just have to sort of step back a little bit and just be with them and allow them to explore what their own experience is.
Yeah, and I think the default becomes, especially if practitioners who haven't had any training whatsoever in grief and haven't acknowledged their own or worked through any of their own grief, their default may be, I will give you a medication for it if you want that, but otherwise I don't want to talk about it because I have no idea what to offer you.
Yeah. And I saw that a lot when I worked in hospice. Many of my older clients, perhaps people, particularly men who had been widowed after 60, 70 years of marriage. And they would go to their doctor for a physical and they would start crying. And they may have been a person who never cried before. And the doctor would say, oh, let me give you a prescription for Xanax. Now, I'm not saying that a prescription might not have been appropriate, but the idea that early on in the grief, that was all they were going to be given doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I like the fact that you mentioned a massage therapist. I was going to say, I think my hairdresser probably heard more about grief from her clients than some doctors I know did, because while she's cutting someone's hair, they're telling her what they're going through in their lives. And it just seems like these tools are something all of us should understand and should have some idea how do we work with someone in our lives who's experiencing grief.
Right. So I hope the toolkit will provide that kind of resource for people. It isn't out yet. It's coming out. The ebook will be out at the end of May. And if you get the ebook, then you'll be able to download the activity sheets. And the physical book is going to come out next July.
Okay, so that's something for people to look forward to. But it sounds like at least the ebook could be really helpful fairly soon for people to be able to download those worksheets and have them available.
Yes.
And right now, I would guess that more and more of us are involved in doing grief work because, as we were saying before, that's a need we have for all of us going through this collective grieving process together.
Yes, we are. Mm-hmm.
And are some of those, would the book be helpful just for us to use personally for ourselves to go through and do some of the worksheets, even if we're not in a therapeutic setting with other people?
I think it would be very effective and useful. I mean, it's written in a fairly conversational tone. It's not that didactic, and the worksheets are very accessible.
So we're talking about the book, The Creative Toolkit for Working with Grief and Bereavement, A Practitioner's Guide. And that's something I feel like a lot of us could benefit just as a resource to have on our shelves, because we're undoubtedly going to need it. And tell us more about, let's see, where will the books be available?
So all of my products are available on Amazon, at Barnes & Noble. The Jessica Kingsley publisher's website has them as well. If you do go to JKP Books, you have to make sure that you put in your own currency if you're going to order from them. So the new book is available for pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And the Karuna Cards and Shattered by Grief are also available. Some local bookstores will carry them. I think you might have to ask them to get it for you if they don't have it, but they can obtain them for you.
Okay. So yes, remember the Karuna Cards too, and that's spelled Karuna. And is there a story behind that name, behind the name Karuna Cards?
There is.
Oh, good.
So my late husband wrote this word on the top of all of his letters, and I didn't think anything of it when he was alive, but after he died, I became curious, and I looked it up, and it is a Sanskrit word that means an active compassion. So it's a compassion that has action to it, like reaching out to somebody. So I told that to my children, and that we all agreed that he was a very compassionate person, probably the most compassionate person we knew. And I made a decision right there that if I ever did anything new, I would call it the Karuna Project. So that's what I call my grief counseling practice. And then when I was developing the cards, I began calling them Karuna Cards. So it's a way of expressing compassion, because that's what the word means. But it's also a way of sort of bringing him into the work that I'm doing, because it's a reminder of him.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that concept, compassion in action, because it's one thing to feel compassion, but quite another thing to actually put that into action and reach out. And that's exactly what we need right now, more Karuna.
Yes, we do.
Oh, beautiful. Well, Claudia, you also, I know that you work one-on-one with people. Are you working mostly virtually right now?
I am only working virtually right now, yes. So I'm seeing clients on video and setting myself up typically in the corner of my sitting room, although I have been coming over to my office. There's nobody else in this building, so it does seem fairly safe. But lately I've been working from home, and I do a full hour with people, and it's it's working out pretty well, actually, and it's a little problematic. I do some work with couples. I work with them on grief when their relationship isn't going very well, and I try to do some conscious relationship work with them. And it's a little hard for me to see their body language, and to do that sort of reflection back and forth between the three of us sometimes is a little more complicated on video. But we seem to be managing pretty well.
Yes, we're all having to be as creative as possible right now.
Yes, we are.
So, how do people, if anyone listening is interested in working with you, how can they get a hold of you?
The best way would be to go to my website, www.thekarunaproject.com. And on that, you'll find a lot of different pages. And there's information about me, why I do what I do. There's the different types of counseling that I do. There's a media page that has all the different podcasts that I've been on, and interviews, and some articles that I've written. I wrote an article last January about the intersection between creativity and grief. And then there's an appointment page. On the appointment page is a place where you can put in, you can send me an email and let me know that you want to work with me.
That's wonderful. Well, Claudia, I'm really excited about this work that you're doing, and I think it's such an important approach to grief, to be using creativity and fostering that in people who work with you. And I love the resources you have available for us, the books and the Karuna Cards. And I want to thank you so much for sharing so much and giving us so much information today.
Well, thank you, Karen. It's really been a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Yes, and I hope you and all of your loved ones stay safe and well. And I look forward to talking to you again, hopefully when we're on the other side of all of this.
Me too.
Take care.
You too.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Claudia Coenen. I loved some of her suggestions, particularly the shield collage. And so I like that idea of strengthening ourselves by making this collage of all of the things that help us with our fear, all of the things that protect us. I think that was a really brilliant idea. And I liked her fear and action worksheet as well. But one of my favorite things was her conversation about different models of grief, and particularly the model of the shattering of the assumptive world. And that's a model created by Ronnie Janoff Bullman. I'll leave a link to a little more information about that in the show notes. But what that means, I think it's a perfect description of what all of us are going through right now, is when the world that we assumed was normal, that we assumed would always exist for us, is shattered right now. And that's the source of our trauma and our grief. Everything that we have known and expected, everything that was customary and usual in our day-to-day lives has been shattered. And we're left floating a little bit without an anchor and without knowing how we're going to navigate that together. So again, this is a time when all of us are fragile in a certain way. All of us have been shattered, and none of us exactly knows where we're going and how we're going to put those pieces back together again. But there is a way, and it will happen, and we are going to get there. We have to trust that and know that about ourselves, partly because we're still here. We've survived everything that we've been through in the past. We've learned skills. We've discovered strengths in ourselves before with things that we've gone through. And this challenge will be no different for us. We will get through it and we will come out on the other side much stronger. But right now, we need to be a little gentle with ourselves because we are going through this trauma of having the world as we have known it shattered before our eyes. So be gentle with yourself, love yourself, forgive yourself. And keep writing about that in your journal. One day at a time, we're going to get through this together. We're all here supporting one another. And I'll be here next week with another episode of the podcast. You can count on that. So until then, remember, we're here for love. So face your fear. Be ready for whatever comes your way next, and love each and every moment of this crazy upside down life. Bye-bye.